There was nothing special about the morning light that broke over the Smith ranch. Same dry gold slant through the cottonwoods, same wind tugging at the porch screen, same quiet creak of the weathered swing. But something felt off. A hush. Like the world holding its breath. Elijah Smith noticed it not in the sky, but in the silence of the pigs. Normally, they stirred and grunted at the first sound of his boots crossing gravel. But this morning, they were still, watching. It was the dog who broke the silence. Rufus. Old, red-coated, half lame from a winter break years ago. Elijah's only company now that his wife was dust and the kids wrote more checks than letters. The hound had slept through gunshots and thunder, but this week? He hadn't slept at all. He was in the pig pen again. Nose to the ground, tail stiff, pacing tight circles like a compass needle gone haywire. Same corner. Same damn patch of dirt by the water trough. Third day in a row. Elijah rubbed a hand down his stubbled jaw, voice low. Rufus, leave it. But the dog didn't even look up. Just sniffed, pawed, then dug. The pigs didn't like it. They crowded the opposite side of the pen, hooves stamping, eyes wide. One let out a low, uneasy squeal and then went quiet again. Elijah climbed the fence slow, boots heavy in the loam. Rufus paused only to glance at him once, eyes milky but intent, as if trying to speak across the gap that language couldn't bridge. "You'll wear a hole clear to hell," Elijah muttered. Still, the dog dug. The dirt was soft, darker than it should have been. Elijah squatted down, running thick fingers through the churned soil. It smelled wrong. Earthy, yes, but with an undertone of rot. Not fresh rot. Old. Sour. Settled. He stood and went back to the house. 10 minutes later, he returned with a shovel. The first few feet came easy. Clay and compost. Pig slop turned to muck. But then something caught. The metal edge bit into cloth, and Elijah froze. He dropped to one knee, brushing aside dirt with careful fingers. Canvas. Blue. Faded. He scraped more, revealing something harder. Bone. A long curve. A rib, he realized slowly. Then another. His breath left him in one long, drawn-out gust. Behind him, Rufus sat down with a heavy thump. Watching. Elijah looked around, but the ranch was still. No breeze. No birds. Even the windmill creaked to a stop, as if it, too, were waiting. He dug slower after that. By midday, he'd unearthed a shallow grave. Wrapped in blue fabric, curled tight like a child in sleep, was a skeleton, intact and deliberate. This wasn't a death that found someone. It was a death someone tried to hide. Beside the bones, half crushed under time and soil, was a metal badge. Elijah lifted it with shaking hands. The letters were faint but still readable. Sheriff Owen McCrae, 1924. Elijah sat back hard in the dirt. McCrae. The name was familiar, like a dream half-remembered. A lawman who'd disappeared, folks said. Swallowed by rustlers. Maybe. But that had been near 100 years ago. No one looked for him now. No one but Rufus. The hound let out a low, keening sound, somewhere between a whimper and a howl. It chilled Elijah more than the bones. That night, Elijah sat at the kitchen table, whiskey bottle open, journal beside him. The journal had been buried too. Bound in cracked leather, pages brittle but legible. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. The final entries told a story Elijah didn't want to read. September 12, 1924. McCrae grows too curious. September 14th, he knows. Tomorrow, he rides out with warrants. September 15th, McCrae won't ride no more. No name signed, but the next page held a single initial in hard ink, HB. Elijah stared at it for a long time. Harlan Smith. His grandfather. The man whose portrait still hung above the mantel. Whose name was etched into the town's foundation stone. The man who taught him to ride, to shoot, to pray. The man who'd killed a sheriff. He wanted to burn the journal. Wanted to toss the badge in the stove and never speak McCrae's name again. But Rufus sat by the back door, eyes locked on him. Waiting. And that damn dog had never waited for anything without reason. Elijah poured another drink but didn't touch it. Instead, he opened the old gun locker in the corner and pulled out the dusty box of ledgers, photos, deeds. He hadn't looked through them since his father died. Halfway down the stack, he found it. A photo, black and white, cracked at the corners. 6 men stood outside the original Smith barn. Young, hard-eyed. At the center, Harlan Smith, tall and smiling. Beside him, stiff and separate, a man in uniform. Sheriff's star on his chest. Same face as the badge. Same eyes. Owen McCrae. Elijah turned the photo over. Scribbled in pencil. 1924. Smith, Carter, Pike, McCrae, Pike. The name rolled in his mouth like bitter ash. The Pike family still ran things in town. Police chief now. Raymond Pike. 3rd-generation lawman. And Carter? That was the district judge. They'd all come from the same seed. Rufus barked once. Sharp. Elijah startled. The dog was already out the door, tail high, moving toward the barn. Elijah followed. Inside the barn, the smell was stronger. Dry hay and something else. Age. Secrets. Rufus sniffed along the back wall, then began pawing at the floor. Elijah grabbed the pry bar and worked loose the boards. Underneath, a cavity. Dusty. Hidden. Inside, a rusted lockbox. He carried it to the porch, cracked it open under the porch light. Documents. Letters. Maps. Photographs of cattle branded twice. Payoffs. And a final letter addressed to the territorial marshal, never sent. McCrae's handwriting again. Come. Direct. It named names. Harlan Smith. Theodore Pike. Franklin Carter. They'd been running cattle theft operations across 3 counties. McCrae had gathered enough to bring them all down. And they'd killed him for it. Elijah couldn't breathe. He looked out at the dark fields. The ranch was quiet, but now it felt haunted. Every fence post, every beam in the barn, paid for by murder. Blood turned to wealth. Lies turned to legacy. The pigs were asleep. Rufus curled beside him, head on his boots. Elijah closed the box. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he drove into town. Stopped at the Historical Society. Showed Martha Kellerman the badge, the photo, the journal. She paled. My grandfather used to whisper about this, she said. He said McCrae was getting too close. Then he vanished. She showed Elijah an old file. Town records. Maps. He pointed to a few names on McCrae's list. Her eyes widened. Judge Carter. Chief Pike. Their descendants. You can't trust anyone local. When Elijah walked back to his truck, a black SUV passed slowly behind him. He saw the sheriff's logo on the side. A man inside stared a little too long. That evening, Elijah sat on the porch again. The wind stirred. Dust swirled in soft eddies. Rufus sat beside him, gaze fixed on the road. 3 vehicles pulled in. Raymond Pike stepped out, hand resting on his holster. Elijah, he said. Heard you been askin questions. Elijah stood slowly. Said nothing. Pike's voice was too calm. Let's not stir up ghosts. Ain't no good in digging up bones. Rufus rose, body taut, growl low. Elijah didn't blink. I mailed everything, he said. Out of state. To the Marshal Service. Pike's face twisted, but the siren started before he could speak again. State troopers. Black vans. Unmarked sedans. Within minutes, Pike and his men were in cuffs. As they were hauled away, Rufus finally lay down. His work done. In the days that followed, the news spread. McCrae's remains were identified. The conspiracy uncovered. Multiple families were implicated. The Smith land that had been gained after 1924 was turned over to the county. Elijah kept only the original house and 10 acres. Enough to live. Enough to start over. The pigs returned to normal. Rufus stopped digging. But sometimes, late at night, Elijah would walk to that patch of earth. He'd place his hand on the soil, whisper the name McCrae, and promise the man below that he hadn't been forgotten. Justice had simply taken its time. Rufus passed a year later. Peacefully. No suffering. Elijah buried him beside the spot he'd first dug. Laid the old sheriff's badge beside the dog's heart. The same heart that wouldn't let a murder stay hidden. Sometimes, it isn't men who demand justice. Sometimes, it's those who can't speak. But they dig. And they wait. And when the moment's right, they lead us to the truth, no matter how deep it lies. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear a story even darker than this one, with a twist so sharp it'll echo long after the screen fades. Go on. Click it. Chester was just the beginning.